Welcome to The Recovering Liberal. I am the Recovering Liberal, Tamara Young. Welcome to my podcast. This is just where I'm simply talking about my journey from left-winged liberalism to not left-winged liberalism. And let me start off first and foremost by telling you what this podcast is not, because I know the title is a little tongue-in-cheek, Recovering Liberal. Kind of sounds like I'm implying there's something to recover from if you're liberal. What I'm not saying is that liberalism, or if you find yourself any left-leaning of the aisle to any degree, whether you're totally a liberal in all matters or just somewhat, you're welcome here. I'm not saying that it is a condition from which you need to recover. It started off as kind of a joke with some of my close friends as they've been kind of part of my journey unfolding, and as I've kind of woken up to what's going on in the world around me. And I also just happen to have a heart for recovery, hence the title. I'm also a recovering alcoholic. So everybody's welcome here. I don't know how many people are going to listen. I don't know if this podcast is going to be allowed to exist given the controversial and contentious kind of topics I'm going to end up covering over the course of this. But that's okay. It'll exist wherever it needs to, and the 3.5 people who need to hear my story will. I'm confident of that. I just kind of want to get it out there. I find myself on Instagram sometimes, or other social media platforms, and I'm like, a 1-minute reel or, even like a longer 10-minute video just isn't enough to really get to the heart and the information of a lot of the issues I want to talk about, and where I've found myself where I once believed one way, now believing a different way. So what I mean by recovering liberalism, the recovering liberal that I'm calling myself, it's really just about recovering autonomy over my own brain, recovering the ability to think for myself, recovering my ability to stomach hard conversations and own the truth as I see it. So that's really what this podcast is about. Take it with a grain of salt. This is my journey. This is my experience. And I found that a lot of the values that I have, which by the way haven't changed, I'll tell you a little bit about myself here in a minute, but the values that I've always held really dear to my heart haven't changed. I'm still an idealist by nature. I still find myself gravitating towards the outcasts, the weirdos, the marginalized. I have a heart for all of those things. It's just that what I thought liberalism stood for in terms of those values is not what I'm finding it actually stands for. And the reason I started a podcast is really because we need longer conversations. You can post a narrative or a belief. You can even post a video to kind of capture, here's why I think what I think. I could just go on Instagram and say, I used to think this, but now I see this. But really, if you're quoting a study, or if you're citing an expert, or even if you're, trying to offer the why behind why you think the way you do, a little blurb just doesn't end up being enough in my own experience. Because when I've seen stuff like that, I've gone, okay, is that good data or bad data? How do I know if it's good data or bad data? How do I know who to trust? Okay, the people who say, no, this isn't correct, why are they saying that? Why are the people who are saying it's correct saying it's correct? Where do people have conflicts of interest at play here? And so I'm going to start out by just telling you a little bit about myself and my story when it comes to recovering from being a liberal. And I'm going to try to keep these short and sweet. So I'm going to try to keep these episodes to about 20 minutes because that's where I have ADHD as well. And that's where my brain kind of tends to check out. So that's about as long as I'm going to talk. I get tired of hearing myself talk. But for this episode, I'll tell you just some highlights of myself and where I come from. So I am a normal, boring, average, everyday American mom. But we all know that none of us is normal, really. As I said, I'm a recovering alcoholic. My husband is a recovering alcoholic. He's been sober 14 years, I think. He and I met a few years ago. We kind of in the middle of our dating relationship is where my addiction I relapsed, and I took a turn really south. I have a history of also just depression, trauma from childhood, as many of us do. So I have a heart and a passion as a result of all of those things for mental health, for recovery, for all things related to people trying to overcome their own challenges, kind of the sets of cards that they're dealt in life. And, rather than expecting the world to adapt to them, society's always going to adapt to, the majority of our experiences. So as a small example, like roughly 10% of us in the population have what we would describe as ADHD, or just a neurological wiring that's just a little bit different. So I've had to learn over the years how to adapt to the world, because I can't expect society at large and the world of career and the world of, social interactions and all of that to cater to me. I've had to learn how to adapt, and also in the process to hopefully bring awareness to what it's like to have this neurological wiring, and for the purposes of being able to help, other parents trying to navigate this for their kids. See, I'm getting off on a tangent. That's like a little squirrel moment. But I come from a background, just to tell you, I also, when I say I'm a mom, I have two beautiful daughters. I have a 1.5-year-old. She's actually almost 2 now. And we have a 7-month-old, both girls. We have a beautiful family. So a lot of this kind of unfolding of my story when it comes to kind of an awakening to what liberalism really is, in my eyes at least, it's kind of corresponded with me to also becoming a mother and caring a little bit more, and also seeing things through a little bit different perspective than I did as a single shit show of a person. So I'm going to say that up front. Like, I have a past. I am a shit show just like the rest of the population. I used to be a real shit show in a different way. Now I'm just like a regular mom kind of shit show, where my life is just hectic and crazy, and I'm just doing the best I can, just like anybody else. I come though from a history in where I have just a lot of people who surround me, friends and family, on completely polar opposite sides of the aisles. I mean, my community really runs the gamut from ultra right-winged conservative Republican all the way to left-wing liberal Democrat, and everything in between that you could possibly imagine. So I've always, I think, had the benefit of being surrounded by a variety of voices. I've always identified more with the left of the population. There's a reason for that. So as a product really just of geography, I grew up in Arkansas. I live now in Nashville, Tennessee. Of course, I've been in red states my entire life. So of course, I'm naturally gonna be around, really particularly my own family. I was raised in a very Republican environment, one that associated Republicanism with Christianity. They were intermixed. You couldn't be a Christian and not be a Republican. You could be a Republican and not be they just went together. And that never sat well with me. I wasn't interested ever really in kind of the version of Christianity as I understood it as a child, because it was wrapped up in a lot of different things that just happened to, I found very hurtful and traumatic, quite honestly. And so Republicanism and Christianity, unfortunately, got kind of conflated in my negative experiences as a child. So I really wasn't interested in Christianity or Republicanism as I knew it. To me, both of those things were really wrapped up in trauma and the misuse of the name of God. And I viewed it as very like closed-minded, judgmental, because that's kind of the version, quite honestly, I saw the most as a child. And then as I started growing up and adulting, discovering alcohol, all of those things, getting an education at a public university, coming up in my career, I always felt like the one thing in life I did normally and that I was somewhat successful at was my career. That was the area of life I've always felt I had some degree of control over. I was kind of lost in the rest of my life. Over the course of my 20s, I gradually, later in my 20s, got reacquainted with the idea of God in a new way and found a church home that I really loved. I saw people like me there. I saw people who were just loving other human beings. I was like, yes, I can get on board with that. This feels right. So I kind of stepped back into a relationship with God, and it really felt like coming home and kind of opened my eyes to, I can see where some of the things I was taught as a child, like I can carry forward with me into this new experience of God. But I can also leave behind all of the painful memories and all of the things that I don't think have any place in the God that I know. And then kind of fast forward to, I guess I'm at my late 20s right now. I got sober, as I said, and kind of over the course of COVID and really the pandemic is when I started really paying attention. I took a really hard break during that time from intaking any media of any sort. It was kind of like a cleanse. And I really had to step back because as I was recovering from my own trauma, I found that I was just like way too triggered by political conversations. Anything that got a little too contentious or heated, I was just out and I had to step back. Part of the reason for that is because I'm married. As I was dating my husband, he's now my husband, surprisingly, because as we were talking, when we were dating, I found out he voted for Trump and I just about had a panic attack. No exaggeration. I had to like step back and like catch my breath, like, who is this monster that I've been dating? How did I not know he's a monster? Surely there's been some mistake. Surely he was under the impression, but now he regrets voting for Trump. And because I remember getting shammered the day after Trump was elected. I was devastated. I had to take off work and some friends did the same, and we just got hammered as the results were flowing in. And then the next day, because we were mourning, we thought, the country as we knew it was like dead. It was devastating. And so that's where I was at, sitting across from, I remember vividly, we were in the kitchen and told me that, and he just kind of saw my reaction. He knew that I was more kind of liberal in my views. I felt like, I don't know, bamboozled. And I just couldn't reconcile. I know this kind, wonderful man has the same values, the same goals, the same this, the same that. And that was my first inkling that we were really on two sides of the same coin. We have the same values. We just see the world from a little bit different perspective. And he called me a bleeding heart bleeding heart liberal. And I called him, whatever I called him. And we just kind of coexisted together when it came to politics. We didn't really talk about it or get into it. He took a step back with me from media because during COVID, obviously a lot of these, the emotions around these conversations became very heightened. So we both took a step back. And then I found myself as I was recovering from my own trauma, as I was getting more into my recovery from addiction and just getting healthier and healthier, I found myself like all of a sudden I would hear things and instead of getting crazy triggered, I would start to get curious instead. And I was like, oh, I wonder why they think that. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I would hear comments or viewpoints that went against the narrative we were being told in the mainstream media. Mask up, we need the lockdowns, this is super dangerous, vaccines are super safe. I had gotten vaccinated, by the way, when I was pregnant with my second baby, Jordan. My husband got vaccinated along with me. We thought it was the right thing to do because we were hearing that it was the right thing to do. So we didn't question it. We rolled up our sleeves and got vaccinated. I'll tell in another episode specifically my story around getting sick from there, my kind of health journey. And then I noticed, I think let me finish that kind of thought before I move on. I started to get curious because I would hear those viewpoints and I'm like, but I know that person and I know that they're kind. I know that I have mad respect for that person. We just never used to talk about our political views. We just lived our lives, side by side. That's my good friend. Why do they hold these views that are just so in stark, like that are so different from the ones I hold and the one, like I'm hearing the truth, quote unquote, in the mainstream media. I'm hearing it, from our government. I'm hearing it from most of my friends. Why are these few people over here like, did my friends over here go off the deep end? Are they conspiracy theorists and are they totally off their rocker now? Are they really like actually awful, closed-minded people and I just didn't know it this whole time? And so I started kind of noticing that. I didn't get very curious about it, but I started noticing it. And as I was finding that my ability to stomach looking into those things was increasing, kind of my window was widening in that way, I started finding some things that I thought were really disturbing. But the first issue, if you will, that really triggered this was when my husband and I just kind of heard in the media that a lot of corporations, and I think it started with the government, that they were requiring employees to be vaccinated in order to keep their jobs. And I just went, what? Like, really? And I remember telling my husband, like, look, I'm all about getting vaccinated, but mandating that people get, like, mandating a health decision, and otherwise you're cut off from parts of access to parts of society and cut off from your ability to be employed at certain places. I just didn't think that that sounded right at all. Didn't think that sounded right at all. And so, like, the kind of extreme direction this was taking with respect to requiring certain medical decisions in order to participate freely in society, that made me start going, I'm going to start looking at this. And then, as I mentioned, I'll share later about my own health journey. Long story short, I got really sick for a while after I got the vaccine. My husband seemed fine. I was pregnant at the time. I had a lot of health issues that I attributed to pregnancy. I was like, well, this is my second pregnancy. My immune system's probably taking a hit. But then it continued even postpartum for several months, where I was getting recurring infections over and over again. My blood work was all over the place. Every time I went in for blood work, I was having to see all these specialists. They couldn't find exactly what was wrong with me, but I was just getting sick and sick and sick and sick over and over. It was a constant state of being sick. So during that time, because of my own health, I thought, I don't care what political views are attached and what kind of implications are attached to having certain perspective myself over this vaccine and my health. All I care about is getting better. I just want to feel better. I just want to get better. So I started doing my own digging around the vaccine, around possible causes of my health issues, around what I could do about it. I saw a lot of different doctors. I finally found an alternative medicine doctor who ended up helping me out tremendously. And I'll talk about the details of that in a later episode. But since then, because of what I found, my eyes just opened. It's almost like, I want to say, I felt like initially ignorance was bliss, but ignorance wasn't really bliss. It was really just ignorance. That's how I feel now. Ignorance is just ignorance. It really wasn't bliss. It was just keeping me stuck and keeping me trapped and keeping me compliant. I never made waves. I never got into arguments. I never really disagreed overtly with anyone. I just went along with the mainstream narrative, and I could get away with that without having to, like, publicly or, in my own life, even to my friends, like, really say anything about what I was doing, because I was just doing all of the things I was being told to do. Now what comes with, it feels like the game of Jenga, where I took that last, like the Jenga towers wobbling, and I'm like taking out that last piece. And as I was opening the door to all of the truth as I see it now, I felt like I was taking out that last Jenga piece. And sure enough, as I kind of peeked under the hood, like, what really is the engine of this liberalism thing? What really, like, this is what the car looks like. This is what I think I'm buying into. What is it really, though? And as I started to peek under the hood, I know I'm conflating metaphors here, but I felt like I pulled out that last Jenga piece, and the whole narrative came crashing down. Really, the whole narrative. And I'm still learning about certain things. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on any one thing. I'm certainly not an expert on everything, but as I've been kind of making my way through issue by issue and decision by decision that impacts, me and my family, I've come across a lot of truths that I think would be helpful for other people to know, because I think a lot of people, like I am, are afraid of just taking one step down this path because they're afraid of what it might lead to. And I'm going to tell you, it is scary. It is scary what it leads to. But you don't have to go down some massive rabbit hole. You don't have to all of a sudden believe the world is just inherently like one big conspiracy not to get you. You really don't. You just, when you seek out the truth, it turns out you just know more. And when you know more, you can just do better with your own life and your own decisions. It's empowering. It's empowering. Yes, it's scary, but it's also empowering. So in the first official episode, I'm going to start out I'm going to come guns a-blazing. I'm just going to come in hot, and I'm going to talk about the pharmaceutical industry. Because a lot of the issues I found, and really, when I talk about the pharmaceutical industry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody a roadmap. Like, what is best in class conflict of interest? Like, what is perfecting the art of conflicts of interest? What does that look like? And I'm going to use the pharmaceutical industry as an example. because I found that for a lot of these issues, it's really not that complicated. Not for everything, but for most things, you really just follow the money. Just follow the money and it'll generally lead you to the why. Because a lot of the questions I've asked are like, but why would they lie? But why would this be the narrative when it's not the case? But why would people genuinely believe? Why would these experts genuinely believe? I don't think a lot of people, I should say, are out there going like, I know this is false. I know I'm being manipulated. I know this is untrue, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe most people are really buying into what they're saying. And the thing is, when you're vulnerable and you're being manipulated, as I'm going to talk about in the next episode and show you proof of this and how this has played out in history in like to the nth degree, and how I believe it's still playing out today to the nth degree, people, when they're vulnerable and being manipulated, don't know it. Nobody goes, I know I'm being manipulated and then I've got invisible puppet strings attached to me and that's why I'm saying this, is because it ultimately ladders up to the billionaires and the money. I don't think anybody walks around believing that. Nobody. But I'm just going to talk about some of the pitfalls of conflicts of interest and why I believe that ultimately the root of a lot of the issues that we argue about that are so contentious in our culture today, get back to one thing, and that is paper money is what I mean. Anyway. All right. See you next time.